Get on your knees, or I'll break every last one of you!
A captain slapped a quiet chapel assistant, then discovered who he really was. At Camp Ridgeline, Captain Thomas Smith ruled through fear. Recruits obeyed because questioning him only brought humiliation. To Smith, cruelty was discipline. That spring, he targeted faith. He mocked Bibles, ridiculed prayer, and treated letters from home as weakness. Watching quietly from the chapel was Abraham, the chaplain's assistant. Soft-spoken and in his 40s, he wore a plain black robe and rarely discussed his past except to mention he had once done contract work overseas. Recruits trusted him because he listened without judgment. He offered coffee, quiet encouragement, and reminded them that hardship never erased their dignity. When Private Daniel Hayes worried about his distant father, Abraham sat beside him in silence. When Private Ellis was mocked as too weak to serve, Abraham calmly told her that people who humiliate others are often afraid of those they cannot control. Smith eventually heard those words and hated them. One rainy morning, he forced several religious recruits into a muddy training pit. Daniel's letter from his mother slipped from his pocket. Smith read aloud her promise that she had prayed for him, laughed, and tore the letter apart. When Ellis begged him to stop, he grabbed her Bible and threw it into the mud. Then, Abraham walked out of the chapel. "Captain Smith, that is enough," Smith sneered. The chapel mouse finally learned to squeak. "They are under your command," Abraham replied. "Their dignity is not." When Abraham quietly added, "I keep records," Smith's confidence cracked. Enraged, Smith followed him into the chapel, threw water in his face, then slapped him. The sound echoed through the room. Abraham calmly removed his robe, revealing old scars, burns, and healed wounds across his body. Beneath it were a gray shirt and worn tactical pants. "You should have left the recruits alone," he said. Smith attacked. In one controlled movement, Abraham threw him to the floor and pinned him without another strike. "You assaulted chapel staff inside a protected place of worship after destroying recruits' religious property and private correspondence." At that moment, Colonel Raymond Alden entered with 2 military police officers carrying a folder labeled Captain Thomas E. Smith, Conduct Review. Inside was weeks of evidence, witness statements, confiscated Bibles, torn letters, reports, and documented violations. Abraham had quietly collected everything, encouraging recruits to write down what happened and submit it through official channels. Smith had exposed himself at the worst possible moment. Security footage confirmed he mocked Daniel's mother's prayers, destroyed personal property, and struck Abraham first. His claims collapsed, his authority was revoked, and his military career ended with paperwork instead of glory. A month later, the chapel held a small service. Daniel had repaired his mother's letter. Ellis placed her worn Bible on the front pew. The chaplain said, "Dignity is not granted by rank, and it cannot be taken away by humiliation." Then Abraham spoke. "I once believed strength meant making sure no one could ever hurt me again. Later I learned it means standing still until the truth arrives, and refusing to become cruel because someone mistakes restraint for weakness," he smiled. "And sometimes it means keeping very good records." Soft laughter filled the chapel. When Daniel thanked him for protecting the letter, Abraham replied, "You protected it by refusing to stop caring." To Ellis, he returned her Bible, brushed off the dried mud, and said, "Keep the kind of strength that lets you stay human." Abraham remained at Camp Ridgeline, welcoming recruits with coffee, silence, or prayer. Never pressure, never judgment. Months later, a new recruit whispered, "He's just a chapel assistant?" Daniel smiled. "Never say 'just' before that man's name." A cruel man had abused authority. A quiet man had used patience, evidence, and one controlled act of self-defense to stop him. And everyone learned that the loudest person in the room is not always the strongest.